Here, the ones who do the work don't get the tips. The one who gets them is the manager's nephew. She said it like it was normal. No one asked, no one checked. But that morning, Jackson Reeves, over 40, CEO of Sunrise, was sitting right there disguised as a stranger. And what he heard made the entire system start to collapse in his mind. Just a few quiet questions, an old notebook, and a silent investigation began. 3 days later, the Pozo system was exposed. 67% of tips were being funneled to just one person. Not because he served more, but because he was connected. When Jackson returned this time without a disguise and placed his hand on the counter, he said only one thing. I didn't build Sunrise so families could hand each other power behind closed doors. Have you ever witnessed unfairness, but felt like you couldn't speak up? Comment 1, if you've ever stood up and said something. Comment 2, if you stayed silent, but never forgot how it felt. Some truths never make it into reports. They don't show up in spreadsheets or quarterly reviews. They hide in plain sight, settling quietly at the bottom of a chipped ceramic cup where no one thinks to look. That morning's drizzle wasn't heavy, just enough to blur the windshield like the town itself was trying to fog over what was really happening. A silver gray pickup truck turned into the lot of Sunrise Diner number 28, slowing behind the weathered sign out front. The neon open 24 hours still flickered with the same soft hum. From a distance, it looked like every other location. But to Jackson Reeves, that familiar amber glow couldn't cover the signals he'd been ignoring for months. Jackson, 52, CEO and founder of Sunrise Restaurant Group, remained in the driver's seat longer than he needed to. The toast he had grabbed from a gas station across the street was still in the bag on the passenger seat, untouched. He hadn't come for breakfast. Not really. And Walt Simmons, the name stitched on the faded flannel pinned to his chest, wasn't real either. It was borrowed, just enough to make him ordinary, just enough to let him watch without being seen. From inside the truck, Jackson could already observe the early shift crew through the rain-fogged window. They moved around behind the counter, prepping for open, but something about their body language didn't sit right. It wasn't exhaustion. It wasn't even laziness. It was something colder, detached, like every movement was being pulled from memory, not intention. The kind of muscle memory that comes not from pride, but from surviving in silence. He thought back to the most recent HR dashboard. On paper, this branch was doing fine, better than fine. Revenue had actually surpassed targets 3 quarters in a row, but the turnover rate here was 38% the worst in the region, and staff engagement dead last. Something wasn't adding up. He remembered something he once said almost a decade ago when training his first wave of regional managers. If you want to know whether a restaurant is healthy, don't ask the GM. Watch how the staff pours coffee at 7 a.m. Today, he would put that theory to the test. Jackson opened the door and stepped out into the chill, pulling his hat low and adjusting his gait into the slight, uneven shuffle of a man who'd been on the road too long. The bell above the diner door jingled faintly as he entered. No one looked up. No one asked for his name. Only the soft echo of the bell acknowledged him, and with it the quiet start of something that would upend everything. He took a seat in the far corner, a table with good sight lines and low visibility. That's when he noticed her, Cassie. She wasn't flashy. Hair pulled back in a loose tie, sleeves slightly frayed, apron clean, but old. But something about her pace was different. Not faster, not louder, more intentional. She wasn't just moving. She was working while the others around her seemed to drift in and out of tasks. A few moments later, she approached with a small tray, a steaming cup of black coffee, a single slice of toast, and 2 miniature packets of jam placed delicately on the side. She placed the plate down, so gently it didn't make a sound. Black coffee and toast, she said, polite but subdued. I added butter and jam for you just in case. Jackson nodded. Appreciate it, he replied, keeping his tone neutral, then casually like a man making small talk to pass the time. Busy morning, huh? Guess the tips aren't bad at this hour. The pause was only half a second, but Jackson saw it, a hesitation that didn't show in her hands, only in her eyes. She smiled, but it didn't reach her face. Her voice dropped just below the hum of the espresso machine. Morning shifts are the worst for tips, especially when we split them, but only a few actually get anything. She said it as if it didn't matter. But for Jackson, it was the first crack. A small fracture in the polished facade of his own company. And behind it, something was waiting. Something he hadn't accounted for. Something that had learned how to survive by staying invisible. Jackson didn't react right away. He simply lifted the coffee cup to his lips, then set it back down when he realized it had lost all its warmth. The bitterness no longer came from the coffee. It came from something deeper. Her words weren't shocking. Low tips during morning shifts were common across the industry. But the way she said only a few actually get anything sent a different kind of chill down his spine. He watched Cassie return to floor. Table 6 needed a refill. Table 9 had just signaled for a second round of toast. She pivoted smoothly between them, spinning around the corner of the counter with the kind of practiced grace that only came from doing it every single day alone. Then he noticed something else. 2 other employees, Tyler, a young man with slick back hair and a perfect uniform, and Chase, slightly older, standing beside him, were lingering near the POS terminal. Neither carried trays. Neither spoke to customers unless they were taking payments. Tyler tapped the screen with his index finger, occasionally processing a credit card before stepping back again and crossing his arms. Every tip passed through that screen, and nearly all the morning payments they were going through them. Jackson glanced at the table next to him. More coffee was being poured. More toast was being served. And yet, somehow, the one who was doing most of the work wasn't even going near the register. He watched Cassie clear plates refill. Muggs fold napkins behind her back without skipping a step. He spoke quietly when she passed by again. "Why don't you swipe the payments yourself?" She didn't stop moving, but her voice dropped as she leaned slightly in to collect an empty plate. "I don't have access," she said. "The POS only allows certain roles to take payments. If your role isn't assigned, you don't get digital tips either. I'm listed under supplemental staff. It's basically the invisible list." Jackson turned toward her, meeting her eyes for the first time. "Who decided that?" She nodded discreetly toward the counter. Behind it, the branch manager, Brad Coleman, was laughing with a regular, crisp, dark blue button-down, a sleek pen clipped in his chest pocket posture, relaxed, the kind of manager who looked clean, competent, and well-liked on the surface. "Brad," she said, barely moving her lips. "He sets up the POS roles. Tyler's his nephew. Always has the morning shifts. Always has full access." Jackson didn't speak, but the way his jaw tightened said more than enough. The system had been designed for transparency, equal split, role-based access tied to job function. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate distortion, a methodical removal of visibility disguised as structure, a way to create privilege zones inside a process meant to be fair. Then Cassie did something unexpected. She reached into her apron and pulled out a thin paper notebook. The edges were soft from use. The cover bent and slightly curled. She held it like it was something personal, something too important to throw away, but too fragile to hand over lightly. "I didn't want to complain. I just needed to know I wasn't crazy," she said. "So I started writing it down." Jackson took it carefully. Each page was a record date, table numbers, bill totals, Pozo's tip displayed, and tips she actually received. Red pens circled key discrepancies. Notes in the margin, timestamps. It wasn't an accusation. It was evidence. The kind no one would ever see unless they asked. She looked down at the notebook in his hands. "I've lost more than $600 in the past month," she whispered. "But what hurts more is no one ever asked who's dividing it or how." Jackson closed the notebook gently, not with finality, but with reverence. He didn't say a word, but in his chest, something had shifted. A restaurant can survive lower margins. It can even recover from poor customer reviews. But when your best people start believing the system no longer sees them, that's what kills a business from the inside out. And that morning, in a quiet booth at Sunrise Diner number 28, Jackson Reeves saw it clearly. Someone had rewritten the rules, and worse, no one had noticed. Jackson sat quietly in the corner booth, the notebook still resting in front of him. He didn't flip through the pages again. He didn't need to. Every detail Cassie had written matched exactly with what he had seen, and what his gut had been whispering for weeks. But instincts weren't enough. Not for a CEO. He needed data. He needed patterns. And now he had both. As soon as Cassie stepped away to grab another tray, Jackson reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He angled the notebook discreetly, snapping photos of every page, each entry, each red circle, each margin note that proved something wrong had been happening right under the surface. Then he took out an old pen and a folded sticky note, scribbling a single sentence in block letters. "Keep documenting, but don't give this to anyone. Wait for me to return." He slipped the note into the front cover of her notebook, gently closed it, and pushed his coffee cup closer to conceal the gesture. At the front of the diner, Brad had just stepped away from the counter and disappeared into the back office. At that exact moment, Jackson's eyes caught movement near the POS. Tyler, standing alone behind the register, leaned slightly forward and tapped the touchscreen. This time, not to take a payment, but to access something deeper. His fingers moved with quiet familiarity, flipping through screens with a rhythm that didn't belong to a part-time server. Jackson could only see the screen for a moment, but it was enough. User role settings. Access level advanced. Username Tyler C. Jackson gripped his coffee cup a little tighter. Behind him, a new employee fumbled with her tray. First week on the floor. Clearly nervous. She hesitated by table 5, unsure how to enter a comp request. Cassie, who hadn't taken a single break, circled back without hesitation. She crouched beside the trainee, showing her how to manually adjust the order code, how to flag allergy info, how to check for modifiers. Then, in a low voice that only those within a foot could hear, she added, "Careful not to let Tyler help you with entries. He's not wrong. He just won't do it for you." Jackson heard that, and in that moment, he understood Cassie wasn't just doing her job. She was holding the moral structure of this branch together quietly, unnoticed, while others simply stood still and let the system tilt further out of balance. A few minutes later, Chase, the third employee, tapped the POS screen and frowned. "Huh, that's weird," he mumbled. "I could log in yesterday. Today it says restricted access." Tyler didn't look up. He just smiled faintly and replied, "Probably just a glitch. I'll take care of it." Jackson tilted his head slightly, still expressionless. But in his mind, the first pin had just landed on an invisible map. Create custom subroles. Limit access. Redirect tip control. If you were clever, it wouldn't look like theft. It would just look like configuration. The coffee was cold now, but Jackson didn't need caffeine. His blood was already starting to heat, not from anger, but from clarity. The investigation had begun quietly, fully, and if Brad Coleman thought that marking someone as support staff could hide the truth, he was about to learn something else. Some of the most overlooked roles are the ones that end up exposing everything. That afternoon, Jackson Reeves left Sunrise Diner number 28 without looking back. The rain had stopped, but inside him a storm had already begun. It took exactly 93 seconds. That was the length of the call. "Mara," he said, his voice low but steady, "we have a problem. The POS system is being manipulated. I need you to go in quiet, line by line. Every role assignment, every tip collecting account." He didn't need to explain more. Mara Lynn, head of internal investigations, had been with the company for 7 years. She had quietly dismantled 3 major embezzlement rings. In the last 4, she asked no questions. She just said, "Understood." Within the hour, the Pozos terminal at Branch 28 had been switched into silent audit mode, a hidden configuration that allowed the tech team to track every roll chain transaction split and unauthorized override without alerting the local staff. The diner functioned as normal, but now everything was being recorded from the inside out. The first findings came in the next morning. Finding number 1. The system had been modified with a hidden access tier, labeled Preferred Internal, a role not visible on the public F-facing staff permission screen. This tier had been applied to 3 accounts. Brad Coleman, manager, Tyler C., part-time server, an unassigned account labeled Kitchen Support 03. The third account raised a flag. Finding number 2. Over the last 30 days, digital tip totals across the branch had exceeded $4,800. Of that, 67% had been routed through Tyler C., even though his average service volume based on ticket data accounted for less than 15% of total tables. Finding number 3. The branch payroll listed a part-time kitchen employee named Marcus Hill clocked in for 21 of the last 25 mornings. But Marcus Hill did not exist in the HR database. His employee ID had no onboarding file, no tax documentation, and the social security number tied to his record had been flagged for duplication in another branch when Jackson remembered investigating quietly 2 years ago. Back then, the case had been dropped due to insufficient internal proof. That branch's manager at the time, Brad Coleman. The final detail came from finance. Douglas Henderson LLC, a shell entity registered out of state, had been receiving internal service processing fees every Friday amounts that matched the missing tip differentials to the dollar. On paper, it looked like payment for third-party staffing logistics. But the contact information on the LLC registration, it led directly back to an email once used by Brad before promotion to manager. Jackson didn't need more. He knew what this was now. It wasn't just a favoritism. It wasn't just someone playing favorites with tip access. It was systemic manipulation backed by structure, a rigged machine hidden in plain sight. And Cassie, she had no idea that by keeping a personal notebook, she'd uncovered not just unfairness, but a multi-branch internal fraud network. The storm inside Jackson had moved beyond suspicion. Now, it had a name, a pattern, a lead, and it would end exactly where it started, with a coffee, a slice of toast, and a woman the system tried to erase. Friday, 9:02 a.m., peak hour. Inside Sunrise Diner number 28, the tables were full. The coffee machine hissed steadily. The air smelled like buttered toast and reheated bacon. Cassie was still working the floor, this time with a new trainee shadowing her moves. Her apron was already spotted from the first rush, but her pace hadn't slowed. Behind the counter, Tyler stood confidently at the register, tapping through transactions with the speed of someone who didn't just know the system. He owned it. Each swipe, each beep of approval fed into a pattern he thought no one could see. Across the diner, Brad Coleman leaned against the service bar, chatting with a regular, shirt pressed, smile measured, laugh placed just right. He had no idea what was coming. At 9:06 a.m., the door opened, but this time no flannel, no baseball cap, no limp to play the part. Jackson Reeves walked in wearing a charcoal gray suit, the same one he wore when opening the company's 50th location. His posture was straight, his expression unreadable. Right behind him was Mara, tablet in hand, already pulled up to the live Pozos audit screen. The moment they stepped in, silence hit the room like someone had flipped a switch. Brad froze mid-sentence. Tyler's hand slowed above the touchscreen. Even Chase, who had been halfway through a refill order, paused with the carf in hand. "Good morning," Jackson said, his voice calm. Too calm. "I won't take much of your time. Just the last 15 years I spent building this company." He placed his hand on the counter, firm, steady, then locked eyes with Brad. "I once said, fairness is not a slogan. It's a behavior repeated every day. But here, someone rewrote the rules, took a system built for shared effort, and turned it into a family favor bank." He turned to Mara. She tapped the screen. Graphs appeared instantly. One showed tip distribution by name. Another showed unauthorized role assignments. The third, a transfer ledger tracing payouts directly to Douglas Henderson LLC. Jackson didn't need to say the name. Brad recognized it immediately. Tyler tried to speak, but Jackson cut him off with a glance. "You received 67% of tips this month," Jackson said flatly. "Not because you work harder, not because you serve more tables, but because someone gave you keys to a door that others weren't even told existed." The room held its breath. Cassie, tray, still in hand, stood upright for the first time that morning. The trainee beside her looked confused, then suddenly alert. From the back, one of the kitchen staff stepped out, arms folded, watching quietly. It was as if everyone had been waiting for this moment, without knowing it. Jackson didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Brad," he said, effective immediately, "you are suspended. Your records will be handed over to legal. Tyler, you too. There is no room here for anyone who turns transparency into a personal hustle." He looked around, scanning every face, not for fear, but for something else. Relief, recognition, resolve. If you've done the work, you will be seen. you will be paid. But if you've hidden behind smiles and loopholes, you'll be removed. No matter how long you've been standing at the register. No one applauded. No one moved. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was heavier than that. The kind of silence that follows when the truth has finally been spoken out loud with names attached. The kind of silence that comes before something real begins. Jackson didn't step away from the counter just yet. He scanned the diner, the faces behind the aprons, the eyes behind the silence. Some looked down, others finally looked up. Then his attention shifted to the Pozos terminal still paused behind Tyler. He pointed to it. Starting today, he said, this system will no longer be controlled by a privileged few. He turned to a young man standing near the back, nervous, unsure, still clutching a towel in his hand. What's your name? Jackson asked. Ben. The young man replied, startled. Jackson nodded toward the terminal. Ben, you're the first to use it under the new access protocol. No more invisible roles, no more backdoor overrides. From now on, whoever does the work is the one recorded and credited. Ben hesitated, then stepped forward slowly, carefully. The entire staff watched as he logged in with his own ID for the first time. A line had been crossed. The old division of seen and unseen was gone. Mara tapped on her tablet and pulled up a second screen, a live dashboard. On it, green bars tracked transparently distributed tips. Red dots flagged suspicious clustering across the network. Other locations were already being pinged. We're monitoring not just this branch, Mara said, but the entire system. Behind the counter, the old access cards had already been deactivated. Tyler's name no longer appeared on the POS interface. Brad's admin override had been revoked. But the biggest change wasn't in the software. It was in the room. Cassie exhaled. Not relief exactly, but release. A quiet tension that had gripped her for far too long finally let go. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Then something subtle happened. Emily, one of the newer staff members, walked up and gently touched Cassie's arm. Nothing dramatic, just a small gesture, human and clear. She didn't say anything either, but it was enough. Enough for Jackson to know. Cassie wasn't alone anymore. From the back office, Brad emerged one last time. No protest, no defense. He simply looked at Tyler, and the faint, wordless nod between them was almost an admission, a quiet acknowledgement that the game was over. Tyler handed in his access card. Jackson didn't put it in his pocket. He placed it on the counter, then looked to the rest of the staff. No more manipulation, no more hidden titles. From now on, if you serve, you're seen. If you show up, you're counted. This isn't just a patch. It's a new operating standard. He stepped back. The staff didn't erupt into cheers. They simply got back to work. But with new eyes, with new footing, the diner wasn't back to normal yet. But for the first time in a long time, normal finally felt worth reaching for. And Cassie, she didn't smile, not fully, but her hands were steady, her walk measured. And when she passed by Jackson, she didn't look down. She met his eyes. And in that moment, no words were needed. They both understood. A reset had begun, and it was real. 1 month passed at Sunrise Diner number 28. The early mornings no longer carried the scent of silent exhaustion. Now it was buttered toast, the soft clink of ceramic mugs, and a new sound, a steady digital chime from the live display beside the POS terminal. Tip sharing transparent verified 8:46 a.m. Table $19.93, total $20 tip. Cassie table $35.41, total $8 tip. Ben M table $62.75, total $14 tip. Emily R. No one had to ask, did the tip go through? No more whispered doubts in the break room. No more scribbled notes hidden in pockets or folded beneath aprons. Whoever served was seen clearly, instantly, without exception. The POS system now assigned roles based on verified shift logs, not personal relationships. Cross-shift auditing became automatic. Every action was logged by actual employee ID. Every tip was encrypted and linked to service history. There were no more gray zones, no more kitchen support accounts without names, no more redirections. But the most powerful change wasn't in the code. It was in the people who had once felt invisible. Cassie no longer juggled 12 tables alone. She walked slower now, not from fatigue, but purpose. She wasn't stationed at one location anymore. She had become a regional training manager, tasked with rolling out the transparent tip-sharing model across every outdated Sunrise branch. She didn't carry a PowerPoint. She didn't speak from a podium. She brought a story, a quiet one, and the old truth in that story spoke louder than any reform memo ever could. At Branch 42, a new hire named Nena sent her a message. "Cassie, I just wanted to say thank you. The first day I saw my name on the tip screen, I cried. I didn't know I was allowed to exist." At Branch 17, a part-timer who had quit returned after hearing the new system was live. She didn't ask for anything special. She just said, "I don't need extra. I just want to not be erased." At headquarters, the end-of-month report showed something unexpected. Employee turnover across the system dropped by 18%. But the metric Jackson underlined wasn't that. It was the last question on the new internal feedback form, added quietly with no fanfare. "Do you feel seen at work?" There was no algorithm for that, no dashboard. But Jackson knew that's what saves companies. Not slogans, not margins. People feeling seen. And now, finally they were. One quiet morning, Jackson Reeves returned to Sunrise Diner number 28. No team, no announcement, no audit. Just him walking through the door the same way he had weeks earlier, only now with no disguise, no layers. He sat at the same corner table. The light hit the surface differently now. Less like something hiding dust, more like something finally allowed to shine. The coffee came without ceremony. The toast was warm. No one interrupted him. Cassie didn't notice him at first. She wasn't on the floor anymore. She was near the counter, guiding a group of new hires on how to check their POS access before starting shift. She spoke clearly, calmly, not with authority, but with confidence, the kind that doesn't need to raise its voice. Jackson didn't stay long. Before leaving, he folded a $20 bill beneath his half-eaten pancake and slid a handwritten note under the plate. "Thank you for writing it down when everyone else looked away. You're not alone anymore, and neither is anyone else." Cassie found it while bussing the table. She didn't open it immediately. She just looked at it, exhaled softly, and folded it like something she already knew by heart. Some words don't need repeating. Some are felt every day. That evening she opened her old notebook. Pages worn at the edges, ink slightly smudged, the same one she once carried in fear it might be taken away. She didn't read it. She didn't need to. Instead, she gently removed each page, placed them in an envelope, and sealed it. On the front, she wrote, "For whoever comes next, in case one day you need proof, you're not crazy for noticing what no one else will admit." The envelope was left on the desk of a new branch manager at a location scheduled to roll out the transparency system next. No ceremony, no speech, just a quiet act of passing something forward. Cassie no longer needed the notebook, because now the system was finally doing what it was supposed to do: record the right things for the right people. Fairness, she had learned, isn't a reward. It isn't a favor. It's not a policy you print once and forget. It's a commitment you make again and again, even when no one is watching. And for people like Cassie, justice never came from shouting. It came from showing up, keeping notes, and choosing every day not to look away. That's how the world quietly starts to change. One table, one name, one page a day.